case, they were really trying to balance out all of those pieces of the Rubik's Cube. So you could never get everything perfect. So if you wanted a day off, or if you wanted to end on a specific day, you had to make another day trade-off, right? And the group really worked hard to balance everybody else's individual or their organization needs that they were representing. So that's why in all of these cases, you can see that we haven't ended school on a Friday, for example. The other feedback in terms of our employees is for teachers, if our last day of school is Friday, they do have to come back the next week as well, right? So in this case, having our last day of school be a Thursday and having teachers be able to come in and wrap up all of their grades and stuff on that Friday, our teachers also reported that being a real positive in terms of how that worked as well. So I can flip back to the summary.
Actually, why don't you flip forward to show the two post-Labor Day?
Sure.
Since you showed the two pre, because we want to just be really clear that we don't have a decided calendar.
There is no decided calendar. I think the committee, the other piece that they worked really hard on, and you'll see this, is in the pre-Labor Day and the post-Labor Day, there's always a 2-week winter break option and a one that's not. So when we look at our post-Labor Day option A here, this is one where we do not have the 2-week break. Post-Labor Day B has a 2-day break. And the committee on this calendar included a school day as Wednesday, December 23rd, and they also wanted that day to be an early release, recognizing that that's going rather late before the holidays. So that day is complicated because we've included that early release day as the Mason move day. Right, so that one has both an M and an ER on it. So it would be no school for Mason and Henderson students and an early release for our elementary students prior to the winter break. In this case, the calendar committee for the post-Labor Day options really was looking at ways to try to get school to end sooner. But in this calendar option, as you can see, even without a 2-week winter break, school is still ending on the 22nd of June, right? And again, it's balancing all those other desires and things that people are trying to fit into the calendar, including the 3-day Thanksgiving break, the teacher workday at the end of the quarter, and all of those other components. So that's post-Labor Day option A, and post-Labor Day option B does have that 2-week winter break. So they have the same Mason move day, the Friday before the 2-week break.
Are you
I'll just chime in just to say, I think the grid that Mr. Bates was showing is really good to be able to see the differences between the 4 calendars. So as you are sort of processing what they are, I think that's a great way to look at it. I'll just end before we take questions, just to say that, again, I'm super appreciative of both Mr. Bates and Ms. Michael and Ms. Goodell as well for their incredible work doing this, and being in the room and hearing all of the different competing interests was interesting to hear what everybody had to say, and I think they landed in the best possible spots. Again, there's no perfect solution. You can't meet everybody's needs ever, but what you can do is you can get really close, and I think these 4 options get us close to meeting everybody's needs that were in the room. So again, appreciative of them.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And I will open it up to the board for your questions and comments. Yes, Ms. Russell.
So just, I guess, 2 questions, and I guess I assume Justin or Lawrence were going to ask this question. So I'll also ask my question was, with regard to the November 13th day that I think is a teacher work day is what it was designated. I have to look at, or maybe it's different for each. But regardless, I guess I'm just curious why the 13th as opposed to on Veterans Day?
So the 2 times where Friday, November 13th is teacher workday are both of the post-Labor Day options A and B. And in each of those cases, the end of the quarter is the day prior.
And
Yeah,
then
and
I
that
guess-
was,
oh,
it's
go.
one of the things that that was shared with the group was that when we do reach that end of the quarter, teachers need that time to get those grades posted in the grade book and so on and so forth.
Okay, that makes sense. And then the second question I had was just to understand, since they weren't represented on the ad hoc committee, how the members of Rebecca Sharp's group were consulted in their, I guess the social work, et cetera, like all those various groups under Rebecca, and how their feedback was incorporated into this calendar and making sure that their voices were heard as well.
Yeah, what we did actually receive feedback from the curriculum instruction and assessment team, which Ms. Sharp is a representative of. So she actually had an opportunity to go through the calendars and look at all of the dates and provide feedback, not just through her lens, but also through the lens of the teachers and other support staff or staff that she supervises and supports.
I guess specifically, I was looking at this section under Robin Borum and the social workers groups in terms of, because I know that one of the pieces of feedback that I've heard from people before is how the 2-week winter break can impact families, or the starting early, ending late, whatever, and how that impacts that population that relies on our extended daycare, et cetera.
The group, after they went through the first exercise of developing the 4 draft calendars, right? Then everyone left and they were provided with copies of the draft, and they had 2 weeks to go and receive feedback from other people that they were representing. And when people came back, the first thing we did was start sharing that feedback. And winter break is a great example of one of the things where you really had people who were really advocating that we really need a 2-week winter break, and we had other people that were really advocating, 2 weeks is too much, right? So hence, the way the group addressed that was really coming up in both the pre and the post. It was important to them to have a 2-week break and a not too winter break in both pre and post, right? Really reflecting that that's a place where there's really very diverse thinking on what's best.
Thanks, Madam Chair. My understanding is there are some religious holidays that span several days. Does the calendar capture that?
Yes, so when you look at the religious observances in the notes, I'm going to use an example. Hanukkah is probably the best example. So under December for the 11th, what we've done is we show Hanukkah, and we state that it begins on sunset on December 10th, and then we show that it goes through December 18th. So we tried to do that with each of those that was a multiple day holiday.
So the Indigenous People Day and Veterans Day, is there a particular reason? Was it something within the quarter type of thing as well of why? Or it would be 2 days off within the same week type of thing of not wanting to do?
So I think one of the factors is without Columbus or Indigenous People Day being a break for students, that students have a really long time without a day off, and that need for kind of a break was stated both by staff who needed time in order to do grading or other professional development work, but also by parents and students saying they really needed that break without going for such a long period. So I think one of the pieces is when you look, if Columbus or Indigenous Peoples Day were to become a student day, you'd really have many weeks in a row without any type of break. And then when you look at where the end of the quarter falls, depending on if you're a pre-Labor Day or post-Labor Day, that also influences where that teacher workday would be, because they're looking for one at the end of the quarter.
I'm gonna add to that just a slightly different perspective, only because we've had this. I've personally had this conversation in 2 other divisions before, and being an advocate in one way or another. Sort of fell to, in many ways for us, which is better instructionally. And some people think this is true and some people don't. It's just another perspective to share. And that is that by going to school on Veterans Day, we have an opportunity to celebrate veterans. And we did that in our schools this week. So each of our schools had some sort of celebration on their sites for those that served our country. And our schools really enjoy that. And if that day weren't in school, they wouldn't have that opportunity. So what I've heard is that there are some that would prefer to go on Veterans Day so they can have that opportunity, and some that would prefer to go on Columbus Day. It's sort of a 50-50 on that one. Just another perspective from an instructional perspective.
And actually, that perspective I could agree with, and it's more from a email that we all had received, that there was the question of all the schools doing something on Veterans Day, because I would, in all honesty, I would have that preference as well, because it does allow the students within our school system to probably, some will do things with families on that particular day of recognizing that, but everyone would not necessarily do it. And I think being in school is a good opportunity to kind of do some type of programming, but it was just expressed that there wasn't necessarily programming in all the schools on Veterans Day. So that was more of my question about that.
I can respond to that sort of directly to say that there was, with the potential exception of at Jesse Thackeray. But in each of our schools, we recognized staff that served, we recognized parents that have served. We put a lot of information out on Twitter about that. So there was something in every one of our schools that recognized community members that served. And perhaps we need to find a different way to communicate it so that the person who wrote to us is aware. But I do want to assure the community that we did do that.
And that if that's the case that we're doing that, that kind of backs me off a little bit of my potential preference to do something, because it is, if we are doing something within the schools, it definitely makes sense to me at that point. But if not, and families want to do something recognizing, those who serve, giving an option that this particular calendar had kind of, in my opinion, it looked like a random Friday that they were getting off within that exact same week. I'm like, maybe there's a way we can kind of figure that out.
Hopefully now you know it's not random. Thanks. Yeah.
I guess my only comment, and I think Kristen already sort of addressed this, is my only concern would be when community looks at this, they don't really feel like they're getting an in-between option, because it's either early or very late and no options sort of on that middle, the day in between. And, I understand kind of how the process worked, but that was just my first thought when I looked at it. So I don't know, I know it's kind of just the way it is this year because the late option is so late. So, just putting it out there.
I'll address the second part of that, since the first piece was sort of addressed already, and that is just to say that we do look at the calendar every year, and we're not going to, I wouldn't recommend that we pin ourselves to a certain date. So if Labor Day falls at a different date next year and we pull the calendar committee together and it makes more sense to start at a different day, and we can get the 180 days in, we will. For next year, as was sort of indicated, these are the 4 best options.
Great. Are there any other questions or comments right now? And again, this is, there are surveys still going to go out, and there'll still be opportunity for comments on these calendars.
One last comment,
Yeah.
just about the survey itself. We've been working on it. John, Brad, and William Bates have been working on it. We piloted it today and had a chance to look at it. It asks some information like, do you have kids that go to school? Where do they go to school? Are you a teacher? Do you live in the district, outside of the district? And then it gives the information of the grid. It gives the 4 different calendars, and then it asks people to rank order. Which one do you like first, second, third, fourth? And then there's a final question, and that final question is, which one essentially can't you live without? Just to make sure that we are really clear about which one we could for sure eliminate. So we do intend to collect that data. Again, it will open on the 15th. And it will run through Thanksgiving, and at the end of Thanksgiving, when we come back, we'll be able to share with the board sort of what we're seeing in the data. And then at that point, as we share that, it's meant to be informative and informational, not dispositive.